This is like a return to the classic vampire tale. Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. My name is Esther.
And I'm Adrian.
We have decided that our next show, something that has been suggested to us a couple of times in our comment section and also from our personal friends, is Interview with a Vampire. So
it's actually Interview with the Vampire. Get your articles correct, please.
You see what I do with? Interview with the Vampire. So we have just finished watching episode 1. Now, I started watching the show a little bit ago and then I stopped, partially because I was like, maybe we should watch it together. But I want to hear your first impressions.
Well, first and foremost, I thought it was really good. That was a pretty good pilot episode.
Oh, I think that was phenomenal pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, watching it the second time through, I'm like, nah, that's good stuff.
I just want to say in relation to Jacob Anderson, what were Dan and Dave doing in Game of Thrones?
Wasting his time and talents.
Oh my God. That little monologue that he gives at the end of the first episode in Interview with the Vampire, I was like, wait, whoa, hold on. This is like magnificent range as an actor.
Even base level, get into the accent.
I'm saying, that's a British guy.
He's British?
Yes.
I didn't even know. I just knew you are not from Louisiana, sir.
No.
But that accent, I was like, okay.
I'm like genuinely like impressed. And it's not a knock on like him in particular with like, I didn't think he could show that range. It's just that I never saw it because
he
Game of
didn't have
Thrones
the
didn't really
opportunity to.
I feel like they gave him a little bit of shine in season 8 of Game of Thrones. He went on a little bit of like a villain arc those last few episodes. After what happens to Missandei, he gets a lot colder. And then after what happens to Daenerys, he sort of becomes the voice of her camp because there really isn't anyone left except for him and Theon's sister Yara. Still, it's like it was like an episode and a half really where he got a little bit more screen time.
I don't even remember.
I mean, it's season 8. It ain't that much to remember. But either way, I'm impressed.
I'm happy that he's getting this opportunity. I see Emmys in his future. If he hasn't already, I don't even know.
What's the guy, the vampire that?
Lestat.
I don't know the actor's name who plays him.
Either.
A very mesmerizing person though. I get it. Because you really got to sell the idea of seduction. That's like a whole thing with vampires, and I felt like I could see it.
We went through a period of time where there was a lot of vampire content, most notably, of course, Twilight. But I feel like this is like a return to the classic vampire tale that is very seductive, very dark. And it's not romantic in the way that something like Twilight is. In Twilight, it's like, my gosh, hot vampires, they sparkle.
The long stares.
You know, like this is like the romance in it feels dark. It feels like there's like a dark underbelly to it, which they added layers to that with the casting choices and everything that they made that we'll get into.
Yeah.
But it's going back to that idea of like, there's like a sexiness to it, but there's also something very unsettling about it. And like, I feel like that's how vampirism and vampire stories are meant to be, because I feel like vampirism is often supposed to be sort of like an allegory for like a lust for something, like a lust for power, a lust for freedom, a lust for something. Like it represents that. And so you need to have that element of seduction, like you were saying, and also of this like this darkness, this horror. Like it's supposed to be horrific. So I'm glad that we're back to that.
In Louise's case, they established in this very first episode, he has a lust for a proximity to whiteness. Like everything that he sort of navigates through, the things that he puts up with. And there's even that line where he said, I wrote this down when he was talking about Lestat, when he says, I hated the man, but I wanted to be the man.
It's a desire for freedom. He's been able to establish a sort of life for himself that was not attainable for many Black people of that era. But the only way that he's been able to do that is by concealing parts of himself, by becoming a different person that he feels like he cannot respect. He is very ashamed of the person that he is, but he has had to become that person in order to have the type of respect and livelihood that he has and that he's providing for his family after his father passed away.
Yeah.
He understands and he sees in Lestat a person who is able to have all of those benefits without having to do any of the concealing and the hiding and the becoming someone different. Like that's a person who is free from all of the racial politics, the sexual politics, because we also have to talk about like his sexuality plays a role in this as well. And so he sees that in Lestat and understands like I think even before he really knows what Lestat is, he understands I can get something like this from him because Lestat is sort of, and there's a power dynamic to this too because Lestat knows all of this.
And he's taking advantage
of it.
I was so uncomfortable in several moments.
Yeah.
He's talking up Louise in a few moments like, you don't deserve this. You're better than all of this. Meanwhile, he's sort of removing some of the closest people in Louise's life so that at the end of that episode, Louise doesn't have anyone but Lestat to rely on, right? Because like when Louise's brother was like, he's also been in my head. That's when I was like, uh-oh, I don't like that because what else has he been telling him? And then you find out with the maiden that he was visiting a few times, she's also gone. I didn't like it at all. There was nothing happy about any of those scenes with the two of them.
Another thing that's important to know is that in the original, Louis is a plantation owner.
Yes.
So in the original, it takes place in the 1700s. So that's also just a very intentional choice to, instead of telling the story about a man who is unhappy. I mean, the original Louis was also unhappy with his life, but unhappy in that he is like taking advantage of these systems of power and subjugating other people. Well, to be honest, Louis in this show does that too.
Yes.
But it still adds a layer of complexity that he's also a victim of it himself.
Yeah. One thing that we did kind of touch on was just the intersectionality of his blackness and his queerness. There's that one scene that I really did like when Louise kind of lies about what he enjoyed about going to that opera, where he says, halfway through, I got hungry and I left. And then Lestat has to like talk to him about it afterwards, where he's like, why did you kind of conceal that side? It's interesting to see, at least from Lestat's perspective, how his whiteness gives him a little bit more privilege in being public with his sexuality to an extent. There's sort of boundaries that sort of exist for Louise. Like he doesn't really have to worry about that in any way. I think like his whiteness has given him enough power where even like, yeah, maybe somebody could like throw a slur at him, but his wealth can cover him for the most harming portions of that sort of homophobia that can exist. But Louise is always standing on tippy toes.
I think it's double things. It's his whiteness, but it's also that he's not American.
Yes.
So the fact that he's coming from a completely different culture that, I mean, I don't know a lot about France, to be honest with you. But I do know that during the 1900s, many a black revolutionary went to France. Okay.
James Baldwin did it.
Now, I've also heard that people in Paris are really racist. So I have some questions. But I think that also plays a role in it too, because he's like, you can tell that Lestat is disgusted at the realities of these politics in their society. And also, though, his vampirism also protects it. Like he doesn't have to worry. Like during that time, being a gay white man was still bad. They weren't accepting of that. Obviously, you still have a layer of protection that a black gay person does not have, but it's still not necessarily safe. But I think the vampirism, it's representing so many things. It's like it's representing whiteness, it's representing wealth, it's representing power, it's protection from all of these things. And Lestat has it all. And for Louis, he's like, I want that. If I can just get a taste of it. But at the same time, he's afraid of it. The scene in the church, the confessional, I think it's just so powerful because it just shows how much shame he has over everything. And he's hiding all of it. He's putting on this act because he says it over and over again in the episode, like, you can't be weak. In order for me to have all this power, I cannot show people that I feel this way about myself. I cannot show people any of this. And he just completely cracks and he's listing all of these things. And some of it's justified. Like some of it is, it's true. Like you probably are taking advantage of some of these women. You probably are, you know, not your business ain't really a stand-up business.
No.
But also some of it is things that it's like there's so much religious overtone to it as well. He's living at the crossroads of so many different identities. He has no space to freely work it out and truly come to terms with like who he is.
I think what also scares him about Lestat is that initially he sort of looks to Lestat as like, he calls him the devil. But there were a few moments of, even in Lestat's story arc, at least in this pilot episode, there was religious undertones with like his story as well, right? When he gives the backstory about how his father and brother distorted the idea of faith for him, and it turned into this idea of the only way for me to feel safe is if I place myself above God in a way, the like way that he describes him, you know, and the way that he turned on that rage, that was a little frightening.
It was very scary.
Yeah.
I think there's also just something to be said about the loneliness of it all. Like he becomes completely isolated. That's like another added layer, I think, of like to the darkness of vampirism. It requires a life of isolation in which you can only depend on the people who are like you, and mostly the people who have turned you. Yeah. And so like Lestat plays some sort of an active role in isolating Louis. Like whatever happens to the woman that he usually goes to see, we know that he's responsible for that. Is he possibly responsible for his brother jumping off the roof?
It sounds like it.
Possibly.
He was feeding things in his head, man.
Possibly not. He was very unwell already. It's unclear, but that's definitely possible. But even if he wasn't, the act of turning him into a vampire is in and itself isolating him now. Yeah. He cannot be the same. He cannot live his life the same way. He cannot be amongst his family the same way. It's very sad because like, even though he was not happy, he was connected. Like there's moments of connection that you see with Luis and his sister and his brother and his mother. Like you see that he is grounded. Yeah. And what we now know is like that's not going to be possible for him anymore. So there's also just like an isolation to it.
I did have a question about his brother. Why did his brother have such an issue with his sister jumping the broom?
I'm not 100% certain, but it would appear that he was Catholic. Yeah. And perhaps there is some attachment of jumping the broom with like, I don't know, paganism. I would assume that it's something like that because, you know, like a lot of the customs and traditions that came out of slavery, like have their roots in like different like African like belief systems and traditions. And they're in New Orleans, and New Orleans is like
voodoo.
You know, there's like a lot of spiritualism of various types involved and like associated with that area and that culture. So my assumption is that it's something like that. I don't know.
I love that it's in New Orleans.
Yeah.
It was similar to the originals. There's a story arc that happens where they go to New Orleans also, and they had black vampires there too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I just think it just makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, just the vibes that exist there.
I never watched the originals. I didn't watch none of those. I didn't watch True Blood. I didn't watch Vampire Diaries. I didn't watch any of those.
My friend, you missed out an era.
Listen, I was barely allowed to read Twilight. Like, my dad was really trying to shut that down.
Oh, my parents didn't allow it either. I just didn't care. I watched it behind their backs. I have no self-control about Lestat.
My dad was a little bit, he was on top of stuff though.
Oh, yeah, no.
Like you see, like when we're watching TV, like he'll stand and watch. He would walk by and stop and just observe for like a good long while.
I just didn't watch it near my parents. Like you guys are watching in the living room, I'm on my laptop in my room with my door closed. Like,
I guess I could have done that.
Yeah, that Vampire Diaries era was special because the storytelling was actually pretty good for an extent. There are moments where it's like it's on CW, so there's going to be things that feel kind of kooky. But when they introduced the character Klaus,
you've told me about Klaus.
Woo! Hey man, listen, I don't remember the actor's name, but man, he put his foot in that acting for that character. And then when people found out that they came up with the originals, it was over. I was locked in watching on those illegal websites, filling up my laptop with viruses. I didn't care. I needed to know what happened next. Twilight was bad, but I do think that last movie where they had the fight scene.
You just like the fight scene. That's
I don't care about anything else.
You just like the one.
Okay,
but the fight scene is fake though. though.
It doesn't matter. The choreography and that was insane.
I feel like the fact that it's all fake and has no bearing on the plot makes it kind of like.
I don't think about that when I remember it. I just think about in the moment prior to the reveal. I was locked the F in. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Because that I had personally, Twilight had prior to that moment, they had like vampire fight scenes, and there were other earlier movies and TV shows with vampires, but technology hadn't caught up yet. In that scene, they put the money into that, and I'm like,
I remember as somebody who read the books, I was mad confused. I was like, what are y'all doing?
You read all the books?
Yeah, I read them all.
Dang.
I read every single one of them. I didn't realize till the last one that they're bad. Took me a long time to realize they weren't good books.
Hey man, respect to Rob Pattinson and Kristen Stewart.
Yeah, they hated those movies.
But the fact that they were able to come out and have very successful careers, very impressive.
Yeah, it's funny when you think about it now. Like watching Robert Pattinson in those movies now is really funny.
You're like, this guy cannot act.
It's really funny. He just had nothing to work with. Man, that source material was rough. Ooh, Stephanie Myers, but she made a bag.
She got that coin and was like, all right, cool.
She made a bag, and then she wrote the same book again from his perspective. She milked that joint. Yeah, there's a whole other, what's it called? There's like a whole other book that's like Twilight again, but it's from Edward's perspective. Oh, wow.
Anyways, I think that was it for me. A very, very good first episode. I appreciate y'all for nudging us.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, thank you all so much again for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time, we'd love it if you could hit that like button, the subscribe button, and also hitting that bell so that you are aware of when we post things. And with that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.